Yeah, I'm in a different location this week. Yeah, this is not my normal bedroom. This is actually my grandparents' house. I'm house sitting over the next week or so while they're out of state for vacation. So, next few videos will be filmed here. So yeah, real quick, I want to just bring this up. I originally started filming this video a few weeks ago, but about halfway through, I changed the script on it, and I'll explain why in a minute. So when I uploaded a video a couple weeks ago, did I leave the webcam on? I was like halfway through as I was filming, I was like, I don't really like where this is going. I meant to stop recording so I could edit the script, but I didn't realize until after a while. Oh, I left the webcam recording, so uh, that's why I uploaded that. And all last week I was feeling pretty sick, and my voice would not be able to handle the strain of talking and editing a video like this for where I talk for a while. So that's why it's finally now going to be made. So just wanted to bring that up. But yeah, so this is a video I've been wanting to do for a while. And basically the idea behind it came from two things. One, a few months ago, I saw the movie Yesterday with my parents and my grandmother. We're all huge Beatles fans. And second was from a video from one of my personal favorite YouTubers, Council of Geeks, where he did a video of basically his 100 favorite episodes of Doctor Who. And with both of those, this idea of basically trying to save a film or show or music series or whatever based on memory is a pretty interesting idea. So I thought I'd do something similar to both of those, basically combine the concept of both those combined, and make this video, which I'm calling 100 Videos I Would Save. And the idea basically is if there was something where like a post-apocalyptic scenario where I was the last man on Earth, or maybe some sort of like I was like say in a bunker or on a space station, and I could save 100 films, or for whatever reason something was going to happen and all movies ever made were going to be lost except for these 100 films, which 100 would I save? And like I said, I've been wanting to make this video for several months, and I started making it a few weeks ago, but about halfway through, about a dozen or so movies, I decided to change. And the way I basically went around doing this video was I made a list of just all sorts of films I could think of that I like. Like, I just basically just made a list, like as many films I could think of, over and over. I added movies to the list till I finally hit about 350 films. And then basically I went from there and just narrowed it down until I got to exactly 100. But then at the last minute I was like, yeah, there's a few of these I'm kind of split on, and some I kind of actually just changed my mind on. So I redid that video, and now I'm doing basically the second version of the list where it's still 100. Now I came up with two rules for what I basically qualified as a movie. One, it has to be at least 1 hour in length, not counting commercial breaks. So basically, any type of, say, TV movie or holiday special that's an hour long, but really it's only 45 minutes and then like 15 minutes of commercials, that doesn't qualify. It has to be at least 60 minutes in length, including credits. So basically, that's what I'm qualifying as a movie. So anything that's less than an hour in length does not qualify for the list. And second, and this was not a requirement for the first list, but it was a requirement for the second version of this list, I basically split up all the films into 5 groups, and I said I needed at least 10 from each group, but no more than 30 from each group. And by a group, it's basically of letters. And I'll explain in more detail as I'm going to each section, and I know this is kind of a weird rule to add, but if I didn't do that, over half the films would have come from just 2 groups. So that was the other reason I was like, do I really just save all these films? Or I kind of wish I could save some of these films. And I was like, yeah, let's put a limit into the groups. And that's basically the other reason why I changed the list. So there are a couple of films I did take off because of this rule. But there were a few films I actually ended up adding also because of this rule. So yeah, like I said, it's a kind of a weird rule to add, but I just felt this was a good idea to do. But yeah, so like I said, divided up into 5 categories, but ultimately this is the 100 movies I would save. And some of them and basically also one last little thing I'm going to bring up, I'm going to talk about every film in alphabetical order. I'm basically going to give like a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the film for people who may not have seen them, and then a one or two sentence reason as to why I would save them and what it kind of explains about me as a person, like basically why I like this film or why I think this film deserves to be saved, because not all these films are going to be universally loved. A lot of these might be guilty pleasure films, or maybe films some people hadn't heard of, but they're special to me, and like I'm a big fan of them for a particular reason. So, like I said, I'm going to give my also reason why I wanted to save these 100 films, and just why I feel like they deserve to be saved. Now, there are a lot of movies, like I said, I started off with almost 350 films, so getting it down to 100 was admittedly kind of hard, and I did make some changes. But ultimately, I'm happy with the final list that I have, and yeah, I'm just going to go through all of them and give my thoughts on each film, and yeah, let's get into it with each category. Okay, so category 1. So, like I said, I divided the 100 films into 5 categories of several letters. So, this first category is films that start with a number A, B, C, D, or E. And I want to make also one quick distinction. Any film that either begins with the word A or the word the, I basically just took that word out and just started with the next word. So, if something starts with the word the, then obviously it's not in the T's unless the next word after that starts with a T. I want to make that distinction because that was the other reason why I made Matt change to the list, because I was like, yeah, do I really need to have so many movies that start with the word the? Because then it's like, let's just take out the word the and then just go from there. So there were a few that you might think, wait, doesn't this go in a different category? No, it's because I don't count the word the or a. So yeah. In this first category, I have 26 films. And like I said in the first part, I'm just going to give like a 1 or 2 minute sentence summary of each film, and then a 1 or 2 sentence explanation as to why I would save each one, and maybe what it kind of means to me. So, okay, so first category, first film, number 1, is called 3 Iron. Now, it's a 2004 South Korean film. Now, basically, it's a movie where a man who's kind of a drifter, he encounters a woman who's being abused by her husband, and he basically saves her, and then he's like a motorcycle kind of guy, so they ride across the country together on a motorcycle. Now, I want to bring up this one quick point about me as a person. There are a lot of movies I do like, but I may not like one key aspect of them, maybe the romance. Like, there's a lot of movies that kind of force in romances. And one reason why they don't work for me personally is if they don't have good dialogue. But what 3 Iron does is something very impressive. The main 2 characters don't speak to each other the entire film. Now, there is dialogue in the film from other characters, but our main guy and main girl, they never say a word together on screen. They may talk off screen, but even then it suggests that they actually don't talk at all. So it's an interesting dynamic for this element to this movie. Having our main 2 characters, the love interests, never talk. And yet it works in this movie by having them actually fall in love through action and not actually words. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it because it is a pretty good film. And I'm not going to spoil the twist ending, but I will say this, let's just say the guy, he does learn a pretty cool trick so he continue to see the woman after something goes wrong. Alright, number 2 would be Across the Universe. Like I said in the introduction, I'm a big fan of the Beatles, and one of the 2 ideas that basically gave me the idea, or one of the 2 sources that gave me the idea for this video was the movie Yesterday. And while I'll admit Across the Universe isn't the greatest film, and there are a few Beatles songs I wish they had also included, but I mean, the Beatles have so many great songs, I mean, you can't include all of them in one film. I do think it is a very good story. And most of the Beatles songs they chose I really like. And, yeah, I mean, all the songs are pretty good renditions. I mean, there's only 1 or 2 I actually don't care for that I wish they would have switched with other songs. But as a whole, I do really enjoy the movie. And, next is, I want to point this out as well. I'm a huge fan of superhero films. And in my first video, I had a lot more superhero films, but I decided to take a few out. So there are going to be a lot of Marvel, DC, and even a few independent, independent I guess would be the right word, superhero films. But like I said, I had to make some cuts. So there are some that are not going to be on this list because that's probably my one favorite, I guess, category film of superhero films. But I had to make some cuts. So number 3 and 4 are Ant-Man from 2015 and Ant-Man and the Wasp from 2018. I honestly like both Ant-Man films. Paul Rudd is like the right choice for Ant-Man, and everyone else in both movies is really great as well. And even outside the context of the MCU, I think Ant-Man, like the original one, stands as a pretty good solo superhero film. If you take out the few references they have to the Avengers, I think it's really strong as, like I said, just a solo superhero film. Next three would be Avengers from 2012, Avengers Endgame 2019, and Avengers Infinity War from 2018. Now, I took off Avengers Age of Ultron. Admittedly, I think it's one of the weaker Avengers films. It's not bad, I just don't love it. But like I said, I had to take it off because I didn't want this list to be dozens and dozens of superhero films, and then I'd have to leave out other films I really like from the first list. That's why I made the second list. This was one of the reasons why I had to take off some superhero films that I feel are a bit weaker, rather than just save basically the overall story of the Marvel or DC universes. But yeah, I really like all three of these Avengers films. And the fact that Avengers has basically been an over-decade-long story of films that basically all tie together into these bigger films, the Avengers films, like, it's really cool. I really have enjoyed growing up watching all the Avengers films, because I was still in middle school when the first Iron Man came out, and don't worry, I'll get back to that. Alright, next one, I would save all three Back to the Futures. Back to the Future and Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3. Now, Back to the Future is my personal favorite trilogy. And while I'll admit the first one is a lot stronger than 2 and 3, I do honestly like all three films, and I would want to save all three films. Even though it is kind of funny to think that the future in Back to the Future Part 2 was 4 years ago now, it's still pretty cool overall, like just the idea of the future in that movie. But everything about all three films I really like. And yeah, as the Screen Junkies guys pointed out years ago, basically there's so much in all three films that's pretty repetitive, but I don't care. It works. It's really fun. Okay, next, number 11 from this category, Batman Begins from 2005. I think Christian Bale is the best Batman. I'm just going to say that right here now. I do think that there are other Batmen who are really great as well, but I think Christian Bale was the best Batman, so I would save all of his films, and I'll get to those later. But yeah, I do enjoy Batman Begins. I think it's really great. And yeah, I would save it, and I'm going to talk about the other two sequels as well, but admittedly I'm probably just going to say the same thing. Next one would be Black Panther. I think it's really great. I'll admit, I did not really know pretty much anything about Black Panther until the MCU basically introduced him. And I was like, okay, maybe this will be a good solo superhero film. And man, it was really good. I will admit, there are, and I don't like using this term that often, there are a few points of not necessarily cliche, but kind of like, I guess, predictability. It's like, okay, only because by this point we've seen so many Marvel films, it's like, okay, I think we're going to have like a fake out death. We might have a bit of a twist villain. But even then, I think it still works for Black Panther. Overall, it's a great story. I do like how it does carry over some of the stuff that was introduced in Captain America Civil War with T'Challa's character. And all in all, it's a really great superhero film. I'm probably going to say this for a lot of them because I just love superhero films. Next one is Black Klansman. I saw this one with my dad in theaters, and it was really good. Obviously, if you haven't seen it, I'll just quick explanation for this one is it's the story of a black cop in the 70s who basically contacts the Ku Klux Klan of that state, and a white cop pretends to be him going undercover to basically expose the Ku Klux Klan. And it's based off a true series of events that happened in Colorado. Now, it's a really good movie. I do think that overall I really like the ending as well in particular, but the story as a whole is very good. And there are a lot of really good jokes in this film, particularly the scene where he's the black cop, I forgot his name, Ronald, it's Ronald or Donald, I can't remember which one. He's calling David Duke himself. And the ending basically showing how some things haven't really changed or gotten better since the 70s was pretty well done, to say the least. But yeah, I really like the film. Next one is actually probably a film I can say is in my top 10 films, like of all time. And that is 2010's Book of Eli. There are a lot of Denzel Washington movies that are really well liked that I admittedly am not the biggest fan of. I do like him as an actor, but basically some of his more popular films I'm not a big fan of. But I think Book of Eli is an underrated classic. Like, it is a great movie. I really like the story. I also am a big fan of certain post-apocalyptic scenarios, and I really like this one. And Book of Eli has, in my opinion, one of the best twist endings of all time. Now, if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it. But one thing I really like about twists in movies is if you didn't know the twist the first time, but then when you rewatch the film, knowing the twist, it actually, like, there's little details you didn't notice that's like, oh, like, this makes sense, or like, oh, I didn't realize that now that I know the twist, but I didn't realize it when I saw the film the first time. Like, Book of Eli's twist is really good. And I really like the overall message of the movie, and I do like basically the ending. It is kind of a sad ending, but I do like basically... Oh, and Mila Kunis is in the movie, and she's actually a really good character. And overall... and Gary Oldman. Like, there's a lot of really good people in this movie. Actually, now I remember it all. But yeah, it's a really good movie. Like I said, it's easily in my top 10 favorite films of all time. So no question I would save this one. Number 15 and 16 from this category is Captain America Civil War and Captain America First Avenger. Now, originally I was also going to save Winter Soldier, but like I said, I had to make some cuts. And while Winter Soldier is arguably one of the better MCU movies, I think it's just okay. Don't get me wrong, the whole twist in that one of basically how Hydra is basically intertwined itself with S.H.I.E.L.D., I think is really cool. And reintroducing the Winter Soldier here is also well done, but I honestly like Civil War and the First Avenger more. And like I said, I had to make some cuts when I made my second list. But yeah, the Captain America movies I really do like. And speaking for Civil War itself, the whole choose your side, I do like how, because we've seen multiple Captain America and Iron Man films, when we get to Civil War, it's hard to really say which side is right and which side is wrong. Because both of them do have their points, and it's like seeing how much these characters have grown. And then same thing with Avengers, Endgame, and Infinity War, like basically how much these characters have grown in multiple films, it's just so cool. So yeah, both films are really good, and like I said, Winter Soldier, I just had to take one out, and that was the one I took out. Next one is a movie called Chato's Land. Now, I also am a big fan of Westerns, and I want to save a few Westerns. And basically in Chato's Land, a group of cowboys basically go after a Native American, and they basically attack his home, have their way with his wife, I want to be careful what I say in this video, and kill, I think it was either his brother or his friend. But then the Native American manages to save his wife and decides to get his revenge and goes after the entire cowboy posse. And I won't spoil how it ends, but it is pretty dark by the end, to say the least, but I really do like the film. Next up is probably my favorite film of all time. And that is 2006's Children of Men. Now, there are a lot of people who think the movie is good, but it is kind of basically just seen as good, not great. But I do love the film. I might go into a review solely talking about this movie one day, but I'll just keep this, my admiration for the film short. I like the overall idea let me rephrase this. I do love apocalypse movies, like I said earlier. But what I really like about Children of Men is that it does something a little bit different. In most apocalypse movies, zombie, let's say Arctic or flood or anything, as long as we can continue as a society, there's hope for the future. But in Children of Men, the apocalypse essentially is we can't have a future because we don't have any more children. So like that right off the bat is a pretty interesting concept. And basically, Clive Owen plays just an average guy who basically is supposed to protect the first pregnant woman in almost 2 decades. And I really do like the film as a whole. One thing I really like that makes it one of my favorite films is the long take shots. In a lot of movies, they usually don't work, but for some reason in Children of Men, it really does work. And I do like the general idea of basically the ending. Like basically how like this war between these two groups basically comes to a halt just because they hear the baby. Like that is like a really good scene. I'm a bit mixed on the final shot itself because it's like it almost feels like they're setting up for a sequel that never came. But as a whole, I do love the film. Like I said, it's my personal favorite film. Number 19 in this category, one that doesn't seem to get talked about as much because even though it is a really great movie, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Like I said, at the beginning I took out the word the and just put under C. Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Now the idea for this one's also pretty interesting. It's a story of a man who ages backwards physically, So when he's born, he looks like he's 80 years old. And then by the time he's 20, he looks like he's 60, and so on. And I won't go too much into this one, but because it seems like it's a movie that's kind of come and gone. Not enough people talk about it. I mean, Brad Pitt is really great in this. And the CGI for basically Benjamin for basically the first half hour, 45 minutes of the movie is really good. Because it's not really until he's basically physically in his 50s that he's actually as himself wearing makeup. Because like the first 3 decades of his life, Benjamin was CGI'd. Like a lot of it was, I didn't even realize that when I first saw it. It's a really great movie, and there are some scenes, admittedly, I'm kind of mixed on. But the overall plot and idea are really good. Next up is 2008's Dark Knight and 2012's The Dark Knight Rises. Like I said earlier with Batman Begins, Christian Bale's my favorite Batman, and Heath Ledger's a great Joker, and Hathaway's a really good Catwoman. I don't mind the whole Ra's al Ghul twist in The Dark Knight Rises. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is pretty good. Now, unlike a lot of people, I don't think they were going for the fact he is going to be Robin. I think the idea is he will be the next Batman. He'll basically keep the story of Batman alive. That's why he found the Batcave. I think that's what they were going for. Now, admittedly, I'm kind of mixed on a few elements in the third movie, like a lot of people, but I don't think the third movie is as bad as a lot of people say. Like a lot of people say the third movie is the worst. I don't think it's bad. And that's, like I said, I do really love all 3 films. So I would save all 3 of these Batman films. Okay, next up, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes from 2014. I'm a big fan of pretty much all the Planet of the Apes films, but I had to take a couple of them out. But I would save all 3 from the modern, I guess, trilogy. Essentially the ones that star Andy Serkis. Now, I'm not going to go too much into all of these, but I will say, as a whole, I do like the films as so far. And I have heard recently there's going to be a 4th movie, and I just want to say this. The first movie of this modern trilogy was basically a modern adaptation of the 3rd movie from the original trilogy. Then the second one was basically a modern version of 4, and then the third one was basically a modern version of 5. So that makes me wonder if this upcoming 4th film will be a modern version of the first movie from 1968 or 1969, whichever one it was. So, yeah, like I said, I don't want to say too much about these movies. I just love all the Planet of the Apes films. Well, almost all the Planet of the Apes films. And I would save all 3 of the modern ones, and I'll get a little bit into the other ones later. Okay, almost done with this category. Number 23. One that might surprise some people. I've said before on my channel I'm a huge fan of zombie films. But there are admittedly a few times I do like vampires and werewolves. But there aren't a lot of vampire and werewolf films I love. But one I would save is Daybreakers from 2009. The idea of this movie is basically, after a decade, everyone on Earth is a vampire, but society can't go on. It kind of has a similar idea a little bit to Children of Men, in that, okay, everyone's a vampire, but we need human blood to survive. If everyone is a vampire, how do we keep society going? Well, you follow this one vampire who basically didn't want to be a vampire, but he's basically been stuck as a vampire for almost 10 years, but then he finds a group of humans, and one of their leaders is actually a former vampire who became human, ironically, from being in the sun. So he basically decides, let's find a way to use this to actually make a cure to turn vampires back to humans. Now, I'm not going to reveal the twist if you haven't seen this one, because it seems like this is kind of, once again, an underrated vampire film, but it is really good. Next up would be Django Unchained. There were a few Quentin Tarantino movies I also wanted to save, but I had to take a few out. But I definitely would save Django Unchained. It's really great overall. Once again, Leonardo DiCaprio is snubbed of an Oscar in this film, as he has been with a lot of great films. But, I mean, the guy got cut up, and he managed to keep the scene going. Like, that was an awesome scene. But yeah, overall, I do love Django Unchained. Also, like I said, I'm a big fan of Westerns, and this is actually a pretty good Western. And there aren't a lot of great Westerns that star people of color, and I think this one is a really great one. Alright, next up is a horror film. 2016's Don't Breathe. The idea is basically these 3 kids are going to rob this old man's house, but what they discover is he has a woman locked up in his basement. And even though he's blind, he's still able to basically lock them in his house, and they have to find a way to get out. And I'm not going to say too much more about the film because it seems like, in case someone out there hasn't seen it, but I really do like the twist ending as well for this movie. And like I said, it is legitimately scary at times. And then finally, the last film from this category is Ever After, A Cinderella Story. Now, I'll admit, there are a lot of Disney films I wanted to save, but I took a lot off as well. That's why there's only going to be a handful of Disney films on this, and not counting like the Avengers or Star Wars, which I'll get to later, but actually like original Disney films. And one of them I was originally going to save was the first Cinderella, but then I remembered this one, and I thought, this is actually a stronger story, or telling of the story of Cinderella, probably the strongest one out there. And it is overall a pretty cool idea of how to tell the story of Cinderella. And yeah, I really like it. So, if you haven't seen it, it's actually, I think, probably better than any version of the Cinderella. So yeah, I just think it deserves to be saved. So that's my first category. Like I said, number A, B, C, D, and E, and I would save 26 films. So now I'm going to go on to the second category. Okay, category number 2. Films that start with the letters F, G, H, I, and J. Now I have 22 from this category. Okay, first is 1997's The Fifth Element. It's a very fun, very cool, original sci-fi film. Like, there's a lot of great actors in this movie. The idea is pretty original. Like, still to this day, it's just so cool. A lot of the CGI holds up pretty well, too. There's just a lot to like in this movie. I mean, obviously, enough people know the story. I don't need to go into it. And it's just like so much of this film has become iconic over the years. Is it a bit cheesy at times? Yeah, but that's what part of what makes the movie so good is just the fact it's kind of cheesy and kind of cliche at some points. And I do think overall this is another movie where the romance may not work for some people, but I do think it does work, at least for me. I mean, everything about this movie I really love. Okay, next up would be numbers 2 and 3 would be Final Destination 1 and Final Destination 5. I'm a big fan overall of the Final Destination films, but I'd only save the first and the last, because I think 2, 3, and 4 are just okay. But I do love 1 and 5. If you haven't seen them, basically the idea is this one person has a vision of some sort of catastrophic event, and so they and a few other people manage to avoid the event, but then slowly, one by one, they start to die, and the whole premise of the film is them trying to survive or try to cheat death. And this is another series basically that has a lot of twist endings. And like I said, some of them are better than others, but I think 1 and 5 are the strongest. And really, I think that's all you would really need to see. Sure, 2 is a direct sequel to 1, but I don't think it's really that good. But I do think 1 and especially 5 are really good movies. Number 4 would be Finding Nemo. Now, while I'll admit I did see Finding Dory, I thought it was just okay. But I do love Finding Nemo. It is a great story overall. I think it's one of the better Pixar films, and yeah, I would save it. Not really too much I can say about this one that people haven't already said. Next up would be 2017's Get Out. The one, it's also a movie I'd probably put in my top 10 favorite films of all time. Basically, in the premise for this one is a black guy meets his white girlfriend's wealthy family for the first time, and he discovers that there's some sort of strange plot going on. I won't go too much into it for the people who haven't seen it, but it is a great movie. Part of the reason why it's in my top 10 favorite films of all time is for the longest time, I used to argue that this was one of a few films I could not think of a plot hole for. Like I've said in the past, if you know me personally, that if you look at any film hard enough, you're going to find a plot hole. It took me forever to find a plot hole for Get Out. And even then, if the film addresses the plot hole itself, I don't really know if that really makes it a plot hole or not. But that's a different story altogether, basically, the movie. Which is the whole, can people buy the premise? And yeah, if you make fun of, and yeah, it's kind of a premise is a bit of a stretch, but even then, the story as a whole is so well told, and like all the characters are really great, and it is legitimately scary at times, especially the whole hypnotism scene halfway through the movie. Like that legitimately does creep me out a bit. But yeah, all in all, like I said, it's in my top 10 favorite films. I would save it. Next up is M. Night Shyamalan's Glass. I know some people were kind of split on this movie, but I legitimately really loved it. And there are a few M. Night Shyamalan films I also wanted to save that are more guilty pleasures, but this was like the only one that really was guilty pleasure I chose to save. And there are going to be a few M. Night Shyamalan movies that are really popular I chose not to save just because I think they're a bit overrated. But I do love Glass. Like, it's basically a trilogy that took almost 2 decades to make, But I think the payoff was really well done. I do think everyone does a great job in here, and the fact that some of the characters from Unbreakable do come back as well, not just Bruce Willis. I think it is, all in all, a really great ending to the trilogy. But, like I said, I didn't choose to save all three, and I'll explain which one I chose not to save when I get to the other one. Next, number 7 on this category, 1985's Goonies. What can I say about Goonies that hasn't already been said? It's a great movie. Just the overall idea is fun. All the characters are really fun to watch. Sloth is such a memorable, "Hey, you guys!" In fact, I think I actually had once worn a shirt that actually was of Sloth saying that, just because he's just that iconic of a character. I mean, just so many great things in this movie. Like, I don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said about it. It's just a timeless classic. I definitely would save this one. Okay, next, I would save both Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I honestly had never heard of Guardians of the Galaxy before seeing the film in theaters. And man, I love both films. Like, I just think overall, like, again, even taking, at least for the first one anyway, if you take out the few references to Avengers, it's a really strong standalone superhero film. Just the idea of basically this ragtag team of superheroes coming together and basically defeating a guy who basically wants to... Well, okay, admittedly, Ronan's kind of one of the weaker villains, but at the very least, I think he's okay. I don't think he's as bad as some other people say. But overall, like, just the idea of this movie is awesome, and the sequel is really great as well. I do love Yondu. And, yeah, like, there's just so much with these movies that there is to love. And, yeah, I would definitely say both of them. Next up would be Hacksaw Ridge. I'm a bit of a history nerd. I went to TCU. I graduated liberal arts degree, major in history, minor in sociology, so I'm a huge history nerd. So there are a few historical dramas in history-like films I'd want to save, and Hacksaw Ridge is definitely one that deserves to be saved. Andrew Garfield does great in this movie. The overall story is well done, and I just love so much about this movie. I don't know if this one would be in my top 10 films either, but either it'd be like near bottom of the top 10 or basically like an honorable mention just shy of top 10. Like, I do love this movie, and I definitely think it deserves to be saved. Okay, next, 1999's Hook. Robin Williams is great in this movie. Like I said, originally I did consider saving the original Peter Pan, but then once again I remembered, oh yeah, this I think is actually a better story, if not the best story of Peter Pan, even better than the Disney one. So I decided to save this over the Disney one. Sure, there are a few issues and a few plot holes in the final third of the movie, but overall the movie is really great. Dante Bosco also basically got a start with this movie. At least I think this was his first movie. I could be wrong on that one. But he was great as Rufio. Like, again, iconic. Like, everything about this movie is just so fun. And that's the thing. If I'm going to be stuck with only 100 films, and this is the whole point of this video, I want films that I'm going to enjoy watching again and again. And so many years later, seeing this movie so many times, I've enjoyed this one, basically watching my whole life. So, of course, I'd say this one. Next one might surprise some people. I, Robot. Will Smith is a great actor, but there are some of his movies I'm kind of split on. But the first time I saw I, Robot, I loved it. I do like the idea, basically, a robot, not necessarily robot uprising, but basically just this idea that if humans are destroying the world and robots are supposed to both serve humans for the benefit of the world, or for the betterment of the world, then humans are basically the cause of it. Of course, robot uprising, the way they do it, kind of makes sense. Like, if you listen to the artificial intelligence basically explain it, sure, some people may be turned off by this whole scene, but I think it's handled very well. I do think Will Smith's character and the robot, deviant robot, I forgot his name, basically have good chemistry. And overall, like I said, there are some good action scenes, and the overall idea is pretty cool. Number 13 in this category is one that not a lot of people have probably heard of. It's called Ice Pirates. It's from 1984. This one I actually do kind of need to explain the premise a bit. Essentially, there's a series of planets where water is scarce. So these basically are space pirates who basically steal ice and water and then try and sell them. But then there's this, I guess, evil empire that's trying to find a world that supposedly has so much water that it has more than all the other planets combined. And water essentially is a source of money. And then you follow these two guys who are pirates who basically end up kidnapping a princess. And there's these cool space battles. There's all sorts of cool aliens and robots. Like, there's just so much with this movie that's hard to explain, and I'm trying not to spoil it. Now, there is one scene near the beginning of the film that is kind of a turnoff. All I'll say is it's a scene that involves castration, and yeah, the first time I saw that movie, it was like, okay, I need to stop watching this, but then I gave it another shot to go on beyond that, and the movie's actually pretty fun. It is a bit cheesy at times, but so much of the movie works. And I'm not going to explain the whole twist for this one, just because I think people should see this one. And once you actually see it, like, you probably will come to love it as much as me. But there is one scene I will talk about near the end, and this was like the first time I ever saw this. Basically, they are traveling to the alleged planet of water and ice that they've been looking for throughout the movie, and there's this final big space battle that basically they're traveling so fast, they're like a wormhole, traveling like the speed of light or something, and everyone begins to age, and basically as they're continuing the fight, they age more and more. And it's actually a pretty cool concept for a fight. And the makeup for the most part of the movie is also pretty good for like the aliens, the robots, and then this scene in particular. Like I said, if you haven't seen this movie, check it out. It is really good. Okay, 14 and 15 would be Incredibles and Incredibles 2. I do love both the Incredibles movies. I gotta say it because everyone else has. No capes! That's just a classic line, and Edna's an awesome character. But yeah, so much about these movies are awesome. I will admit, I'm a bit split on 2, but there's just so much with 2 I also really like that I think it deserves to be saved. Because there are a lot of Disney movies that sadly I didn't put on this list, but I do love both Incredibles films. Just overall idea of a superhero family is just cool to me, and I think it's really well handled here. Both stories I really like. The action scenes in both movies are great. I mean, what can I say that hasn't already been said? Both the Incredibles movies are awesome. Next would be 1996's Independence Day, and even though no one was probably thinking this, I would not save the sequel. I only saw it once, hated it, but I still love the first movie. There were some issues with some of the characters and some story elements with the first movie, and obviously some tech elements that are dated, yes. But the first one is just iconic, it's classic. Like, what can I say? I love the first Independence Day, so obviously I'd save it. And everyone, for the most part, does great in their roles, even if you are a bit stereotypical roles. Just so much about the movie I love. Okay, number 17, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, on the original list, I was also going to save the third one, not Temple of Doom, that's the second one, Last Crusade. I was going to save that one as well, but I had to make some changes with the second list, and that one sadly just didn't make the cut. But I would save the first Indiana Jones. Like, I do love all 4 Indiana Jones films. I know 2 and 4 aren't as great as 1 and 3, but I honestly do love all 4 films. But I feel like in the end I could only make the decision to just save the first one. And there's really not much I can say about this movie that hasn't already been said. Harrison Ford, like, outside of Han Solo, this is probably his most iconic role. And he does great in every film. Even 4. Like I said, there are some issues with 4, but I honestly like it. But I would only save the first one. Okay, next up would be The Iron Giant. I really do love The Iron Giant. Like, I've watched this movie so many times as a kid and as an adult. I just love this film. Once again, like Hacksaw Ridge, it's probably just shy of being in my top 10 favorite films, but I just love everything about this film. Like, it's just so iconic of a story, and of course I would say this one. I would love to see this movie so over and over again if I had to, because I've watched it so many times, and to me, I still enjoy it every time I see it. It's one of the few films I never get tired of. Except for when Cartoon Network would binge marathon the movie like for an entire day. I don't know why they did that. Even I would get tired of it after a few times, but in that case. But anytime I see the movie, I enjoy it. Next up, I would save Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2. I wouldn't save Iron Man 3, though. Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. Obviously, I'm referencing that line from the first movie and from the most recent one. But yeah, he is Iron Man. Like, this... If Robert Downey Jr. hadn't been Iron Man, I don't think the MCU would have worked at all. Like, he basically is what made these movies work. He is the perfect actor for Iron Man. Everything about 1 and 2, I absolutely love. Like, just so much about these movies are awesome. He's a great hero. And before this, I'd only seen him a few times, like in like Marvel cartoons, but I didn't know too much about the character himself. But he made me fall in love with Iron Man as a character, and of course I'd save 1 and 2. Number 21 is another Western, Jeremiah Johnson. It's probably one of my personal favorite Westerns. If you haven't seen it, basically Robert Redford plays a frontier man, or not really necessarily a cowboy, but he basically is exploring the frontier. And basically, he encounters a bunch of people, other settlers, Native American tribes. And near the end of the movie, in the final third, without spoiling too much, basically, a Native American tribe kills his family. And he goes basically on this story of revenge to basically avenge their deaths. And it doesn't end the way you may think. There are some pretty good fight scenes, and his character overall I really do like. Like I said, I don't want to spoil too much in case you haven't seen this one, because I feel like it is kind of become forgotten with time. Because this was from 1972. But it's a really great Western film, and I think if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. Alright, and last one from this category, number 22, Jumanji from 1995. Once again, a great Robin Williams film. There were a lot of Robin Williams films I wanted to save, but I had to make a few cuts. And this is a classic one. Once again, it's similar with Goonies. Like Jumanji, just the original is classic. Now, I did see the remake, not in theaters, but just saw it on TV, and it was good. But it just didn't make this list. I had to make some cuts. And Jumanji, the remake, or sequel, whatever, reboot, it just didn't make the list. But the original, the timeless classic that it is, of course I would save it. Because I just love the film. All in all, like, the overall premise is awesome. I mean, what can I say that hasn't been said? I love the original Jumanji. Alright, so that's the 22 from this category. Now let's move on to the third category. Alright, category number 3. This is films that begin with the letters K, L, M, N, and O. And I did make a few cuts from this one as well compared to the first list, though not as much as category 4, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But this one I had 12 films that I would save. Kill Bill Volume 1. I do love Kill Bill, but admittedly, I would not save the second one. I had to make some cuts, like I said, and I decided to take the second one out. I know a lot of people really do like both 1 and 2, but I think 2 is just okay. But I do love 1, particularly the last third. Like, it is one of the strongest, I guess, like, fight scenes in any movie. Like, just, like, everything about this movie is awesome. And, I mean, there's really not much I can say that hasn't already been said. I mean, it can be quite graphic at times, but man, these movies are great. But like I said, I had to make some cuts, so I decided just to save the first one. The second one from this category, Kingsman: The Secret Service. I really like Kingsman. I do think the sequel was just okay. I didn't hate it as much as a lot of other people did, though admittedly, you probably could have cut it by maybe half an hour, the sequel, and it just didn't make the list. But I do love the first movie. Like, it is such a great story. So much about it works. There are a few cool long fights, particularly the one in the church. It's easily one of the best fight scenes in any movie I've ever seen, considering how much of it is like long takes. Similar to Children of Men, sometimes long takes work, sometimes they don't. But in this movie, Kingsman, like, it just is awesome. And I kind of had a few issues with the sequel, like I said. That's why I didn't make the list. But there really is not that much that bothers me with the first movie. I think overall it really is great. So, of course, I'd save it. Next one would be the Lego Batman movie. As I said, I do like Batman. I do think Christian Bale is my favorite Batman. But Will Arnett is also really great as Batman. Now, admittedly, I think the first Lego movie is good, but I don't love it. But I love the Lego Batman movie. Like, there's just so much about this movie that's awesome. And it's just like poking fun of the cliches of Batman, pointing out like all the things that the pros and cons of basically all the different Batman movies from over the years, breaking the fourth wall a couple times, and even making fun of Suicide Squad at one point. Like, there's just so much about this movie. Zach Galifianakis as the Joker is awesome. I still think Heath Ledger is, to this day, is the best Joker, but Zach Galifianakis as the Joker is also really good. Like, there's just so much about this movie I just really love. Okay, next up, another kind of a post-apocalyptic movie I really like, 1976's Logan's Run. I really like the idea of Logan's Run, and there's a lot of other movies that I personally like that have similar premises to Logan's Run, but Logan's Run is just a timeless classic. There's just so much about the movie that I really like, Admittedly, I'm kind of split on the ending. I think it's almost a bit too much like a Deus Ex Machina. But just this idea, basically, someone who's supposed to enforce the law, and then he's basically forced to break it. I do like the idea. I mean, another movie that I do like personally that didn't make the list was Repo Men, and that's similar to Logan's Run in a few ways. But just so much about this movie I really do like. It's a great movie. It's a classic. Of course I'd save it. Next, I'd save the original Matrix. Now, admittedly, this would be the only one I would save for a particular reason. The Matrix, to me, is the perfect example of a franchise that didn't need to be a franchise. Because, to me, each Matrix sequel is worse than the one before. I love the original Matrix, really like the Animatrix. Matrix 2 is good, and I did not like the final Matrix movie. So I would only save the first Matrix because I think it does work better as a standalone. Not to say that the 3 sequels are bad. There are elements to the 3 sequels I like, but I just feel the only one that deserves to be saved is the original Matrix. And even then, the first Matrix isn't perfect, mind you, but there's just so much about it that I really do like. And like I said, it deserves to be saved. Okay, number 6 is once again a movie I don't think enough people are aware of, but it's once again a superhero film. And I really tried my hardest to save this one, because admittedly it's a guilty pleasure movie, but I really do love it. 1993's Meteor Man. Basically, the story of this is a teacher gets struck by a meteorite, like you see it go into his chest. That is a really horrific scene. But basically, he gets superpowers from it. Now, it's a really cheesy movie, because there's a lot of dumb powers he gets. Like, one of his powers, he can touch a book, and he understands, like, everything in the book for, like, 60 seconds, I think. One of his powers, I think, is to, like, basically... Like, he has, like, standard powers like flight. But then he also can, like, talk to dogs. Like, there's a lot of crazy powers this guy has. And there's a lot of famous people from the 90s. Like, Sinbad's in it. And there's, and the one controversial character that's also in it is Bill Cosby. He plays a homeless man who actually finds a shard of the meteorite, so he gets a few of the powers. And there's a lot of crazy elements in this movie, admittedly. And while I wouldn't say it's the strongest story, I really do like the ending. And I do like the general idea. I will spoil this one element from the movie. Basically, about 2/3 of the way into the movie, before we get to our final act, basically the gang that basically was terrorizing the neighborhood the superhero lived in before he became a superhero is called the Golden Lords. And they basically terrorize the neighborhood worse than ever before, and the neighborhood people blame him for it. And he gives this really good speech. I won't say the whole speech, but there's one line I really like. How can you complain if you do nothing? And it kind of goes to that whole idea with a lot of superhero movies that anybody can be a hero, or that it's not the superpowers that make you a hero, it's doing the right thing. It's kind of the same thing here. Anyone can do the right thing, but you actually have is capable of doing the right thing, but you have to make an effort to do so. That's what I basically view, because at this point in the movie, he's slowly losing his powers, and that's why you couldn't save the neighborhood when the rival gang destroyed it. So I do like this idea of the movie. There are a lot of great elements in the movie. It is cheesy at times, like I said, but I think it deserves to be saved. It is a movie I like, and this is my list of 100 films, and you may not agree with every film on this list, but I would say Meteor Man. Next up is Minority Report. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Tom Cruise, I gotta be honest. Just the Mission Impossible films, I'm not a fan of, and there's a lot of other Tom Cruise films I don't really like. But I do love Minority Report. I do like the overall idea of it. I'd say this one is also just shy of making it in my top 10 favorite films. But I just like so much of this movie. I like the overall idea. I think there is a pretty good twist that comes up about 2/3 of the way into the movie, and I do like this idea, like, just because you can see a crime in the future, does that mean you have the right to stop it? And just knowing the future, doesn't that actually change the future? In this case, yeah. So overall, there's a lot of great elements to this movie. I do think the action scenes in it are pretty cool. And, yeah, it's overall a really great movie. Next up is Monsters, Inc. Yeah, I noticed I've saved more Pixar films than just regular Disney films. But I do like Monsters, Inc. I wouldn't save the sequel. I thought the sequel was a bit of a letdown. I didn't think it was bad, but I just didn't love it. But yeah, I do like Monsters, Inc. overall. It's really funny. It has a really great story, really great characters, and really nothing much I can say that hasn't already been said. I just really love Monsters, Inc. Okay, next two films. I knew going into this list I wanted to save some of the Muppet films because as a kid I loved the Muppets. And I still kind of do like some of the Muppet films. Now, my first list, I had 3 of them, but this list I only have 2. The original Muppet movie from 1979 and Muppets from Space. Now, some people might be surprised by that one. Gonzo is my favorite character of the Muppets, so I'd save the one that, of course, stars Gonzo. Now, the first list I had Muppet Treasure Island, but I took that one off for the third list, just because I had to make some cuts. Well, I do like Muppet Treasure Island, and I think I mostly like it more for the songs than for the story. But in the end, I had to make cuts, like I said, so I took that one out. But I do love the original Muppet movie. I think it's a timeless classic. My only thing about the movie I don't really like, admittedly, is the main villain. I think he's not the best villain. But overall, I do like the movie. And Muppets from Space, like I said, I do love Gonzo. And I do like the story overall from Muppets from Space. And the fact that they made Gonzo an alien, I think, finally makes sense. Because, like, for the longest time, no one knew what Gonzo was. So I was like, isn't he, like, an alien or a monster? And it's like, okay, finally we have that set in a movie. Although, in the more recent Muppet movies, they've kind of gone back on that idea. But oh well, I do like it. Number 11 would be the original National Treasure from 2004. I admittedly also like the sequel, but didn't include it in the first list, didn't include it in the second list. Nicolas Cage is a great actor, but he doesn't always pick the best movies, but I think he is really great in this one. And just the overall idea, I admit, there are some times I do like conspiracy theories, and I think this movie does a conspiracy theory story pretty well. Me, I'm a big history nerd, like I said. I just think this is another kind of history movie that I really like. And then finally, number 12 from this category, 1958's Night to Remember. I do like the James Cameron Titanic movie. I'll get to that one later. But I did not know for the longest time, essentially it was his, I guess, remake of this movie, Night to Remember from 1958. Again, it started with an A, but I didn't put it in the A category, put it here in the ends. So, basically, if you watch this movie and James Cameron's Titanic, there's a lot of elements from this movie he incorporated into his. Essentially, it's just a retelling of A Night to Remember, but you add in that whole love story between Jack and Rose and the story about the diamond necklace. But I think Night to Remember is also another great telling of the Titanic story. And admittedly, I think it's a little bit more accurate in some aspects, because again, they don't focus on the love story. But even then, so much about the movie is enjoyable. I think it's really great, and not enough people have seen Night to Remember. But I was a little iffy, should I say both Night to Remember and Titanic? But I decided, yeah, I would say both. And again, I'll get to that later when I talk about Titanic. But yeah, so I would save Night to Remember, because I do think it's a great movie. So yeah, that's category 3. Now on to the big one, category 4. Okay, category 4. Now, as I said back at the beginning of this video, I had 2 rules going in. The film had to be at least an hour long, not counting commercial breaks. And second, I would have minimum of 10 from each of the 5 categories, but no more than 30 from the 5 categories. Now, when I made my first list, I didn't have this rule. And as I said, if I didn't, over half of the movies I would save would be from Category 1 and Category 4. In my first list, Category 4, I think, had either 34 or 36 movies. So over a third came from just this one category. P, Q, R, S, and T. And keep in mind, I took movies that started with the word "the" out of the T category, but even then, I still had over 30. Because there were just so many films in this category, I ultimately decided the second time to make the rule to only limit myself to 30, which meant I had to take like 5 or 6 out of this category. So there were a few movies I had to cut. And there's just so many from this category, but let's just get through them. First one from this category, Pan's Labyrinth. I really love Pan's Labyrinth. From the first time I saw it, it was great. Something I want to point out as well, Doug Jones is a great creature actor. And he does awesome as the fawn. Overall, the story is something very original. Like, I'd never really heard of this, seen a story like this before. And if you ignore, well, let me rephrase that. If you look at the subplot of the movie, basically the whole war going on at the time, it's also a pretty interesting story. Because that's the one thing with a lot of shows or movies, if they have like a subplot, usually the subplot may not be as good as the main plot, but here the subplot's also handled pretty well. The story about the doctor and the maid who are basically working for the opposing army that's living at this general's mansion army base thing. Basically, Ophelia is a great character. I do like her overall story. I do overall like the movie. I think this one would also probably be in my top 10 favorite films. But yeah, there's really not much I can say about this one that hasn't already been said. Next up is 2000's Patriots, starring Mel Gibson. Basically, this one's a story about the Revolutionary War, and with the exception of one scene, which we'll talk about in a minute, it is fairly accurate to the events of the original American Revolution. I do like historical dramas and history movies, and like I said, exception of one scene, which is basically the British burning a church that had the colonists locked inside of it. It's kind of a bit of a controversial scene and one that actually never did happen in real life. But even then, the rest of the movie is so great. Heath Ledger, once again, is in this movie, and he does great as the son. Mel Gibson does really great as the father, who's basically titled the Ghost, who's basically one of the leaders of the army at the time, well, of this division of the army, I should say. So much about the movie is great. Also, one thing to point out, I'm a big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Avatar: Legend of Korra. And the main general villain in this movie, he's actually the voice of one of the Avatar villains. I forgot his name. I think it's General Zhao, I think is how you say it. But yeah, so much about the movie is great. A lot of great characters, a lot of great actors in this movie. Overall, like I said, with the exception of that one scene, the story is really good. So yeah, I would definitely love to save this one. And then plus, as a history nerd, obviously there's some history films I would save. Next up, 2015's The Peanuts movie. I grew up loving The Peanuts. But there are a few that didn't make this list either because of time or just because they're good but not great. But easily 2015's The Peanuts movie is in my top 10 favorite films. Now, I'm not going to lie, I actually saw this one with my mom in theaters. And this was when I was, I think, late high school, early college. I forgot which school year I was at this time. But she and I saw it together because she grew up watching Peanuts. I grew up watching The Peanuts, and we both loved it. Just so much about this movie is awesome. It's all in all a great story. There's plenty of references to other Peanuts movies. And once again, the whole subplot with Snoopy basically writing the novel about him fighting the Black Baron. Like, that's also a great story. Charlie Brown. Like, just so much about Charlie Brown. Like, my mom used to call me her little Charlie Brown. And I don't care sharing that. And it's just like, I love this movie. Like, just so much about this movie is great. Like I said, it's in my top 10 favorite films. Of course I would save the Peanuts movie. Next up, the original 1968 Planet of the Apes. While I do like I said, all three of the modern version, I do love the original 1968 Planet of the Apes. And I do love, for the most part, its 4 sequels. But I don't think any of them are great enough to be saved. The only one I was considering saving was the third one. But even then, I ultimately decided not to and just saved the original classic Planet of the Apes. I do like all 5 Planet of the Apes movies from this era, the late 60s, early 1970s movies, but I would only save the original classic Planet of the Apes. Like, I just love Planet of the Apes overall, but this was the only one from this era I would save. Next up is another guilty pleasure that might surprise some people. Kevin Costner's movies, there are a lot I really do like, but the one I chose to save... On my first list, I had Dances with Wolves, but obviously I took it off of this one. But I chose to save this one, The Postman. Now, admittedly, Postman's not a great movie, but for the most part, it's a guilty pleasure. I do love The Postman. I think it's a great movie. There are some good ideas and messages in this movie. The fight scenes are actually pretty cool. And I do overall like the movie. There are some issues with it I do have, of course, but... it's a guilty pleasure. I would choose to save it. And it's just, like I said, this is the 100 films I would save. So I would save this one. Next up, 1998's Prince of Egypt. I've mentioned a few times in the past that I was born and raised Baptist. And I still am a Christian to this day, Baptist. And there are a few films, adaptations of the Bible stories I like. But this is like the only one I would actually want to save. Now, Book of Eli, like I said, the whole twist there... as you find out, he is carrying a Bible. Now, I'm revealing... well, there were technically 2 twists. That was the second one. But that one you found out earlier on... well, that was the first one. That was the one you found out earlier in the movie. He's saving a Bible. But the second twist I won't say. But it's not necessarily a Christian film. This one is a Christian film. It's the story of Moses, and I actually do like it more here than the actual... any incarnate story of the Ten Commandments. Even the one starring Charlton Heston... I do think that this one is the best version of telling the story of Moses and the Ten Commandments. So I would definitely save Prince of Egypt. I grew up watching this one in Sunday school and even on TV as a kid. I loved it. I do think it's a great movie, and I think it deserves to be saved. Number 7 in this category, Ratatouille. Again, I'm surprised with how many Pixar films. I didn't realize how many of them I'd say until I realized until I was done making this second time. I say more Pixar than just regular Disney. But yeah, I do love Ratatouille. It's really funny. Patton Oswalt does great as Remy. Like I said, not really much I can say that hasn't already been said. Just overall, the story's really good, really funny movie, and of course I would save it. Next up, 2011's Rise of the Planet of the Apes. As I kind of said in the first category, I do love all three of the modern Planet of the Apes, and Andy Serkis does really great as Caesar in all three films. And I would just save all three of those films, just because I love all three of them. Really not much I can say about it, just all three movies are great. Now we get to Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Now, I do like Star Wars as a whole, and I did want to try and save as many of the Star Wars films as I could, but I had to make a few cuts, and I'll get to them further on in the section because this is P, Q, R, S, and T, like I said, so Star Wars I will talk about later. But I do like Rogue One as a standalone Star Wars film. It does really good. It basically does its job, basically being a prequel to Episode 4, and overall it's a great, just standalone story. Next up, 1992's Sin of a Woman. Once again, it's in my top 10 favorite films. Al Pacino is awesome. Now, you may have noticed I didn't save any of the Godfather films. I think they are good, but I just didn't like any of them enough to want to put them on the list. Even 1 and 2, while I do like them, I ultimately decided just not to put Godfather on this list. But Sin of a Woman is my favorite Al Pacino film, to be honest, so I would save Sin of a Woman. Like, there's so much about this movie I love. I particularly love, like, the final scene of basically him coming to the trial to help defend Charlie. And his speech is one of my favorite movie speeches of all time. I just really love this movie. Next up is kind of, once again, an underrated film. 2015's Selfless. It stars Ben Kingsley and Ryan Williams. And without saying too much, basically Ben Kingsley finds this company that puts his brain inside the body of a former soldier who's portrayed by Ryan Williams. But unfortunately, he still has memories of Ryan Williams' life that kind of interfere with his. And then basically he and Ryan Williams' wife and daughter are basically discover this plot of what the company is actually doing with these bodies. So basically, Ben Kingsley in Ryan Williams' body has to basically stop this company. And it's a really good story. I do like the idea, and there are some elements that are similar to the movie Get Out here as well. But without spoiling the ending, I do think it also ends on a pretty good note. And overall, I do like the movie. Like I said, it's a guilty pleasure. Number 12 is Shape of Water. Guillermo del Toro, I'm a big fan of. Obviously, I already included Pan's Labyrinth, but I also wanted to include The Shape of Water. Once again, it has Doug Jones as the fish man. And he's, like I said, a great character actor. And similar to 3 Iron, the very first film I had on my list, our two main characters in this film, basically the romance between them is not based on talking. Because Eliza is mute, and obviously the fish man is fish man. He doesn't talk. Now, sure, there is the scene where she sings, and obviously she speaks through sign language, and then her interpreter friend. But the fact that they don't really talk to each other than through sign, and even then, I think it is a really well-handled story. Now, admittedly, to paraphrase a joke from John Oliver, the concept of falling in love with a fishman is gross, and some people might have actually wanted them to both die, because it's disgusting. Hey, if you find that gross, I understand, but the overall story of the movie is good. Next up is Shawshank Redemption. Once again, one of my top 10 favorite films, and arguably one of the best films of all time. What can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? It's a great story. Morgan Freeman is awesome in this movie. I mean, just anything with Morgan Freeman, even if it's a bad movie, just his voice makes the movie that much better. Like, look at March of the Penguins. The original March of the Penguins actually did not have Morgan Freeman narrating. If he didn't narrate, the movie probably would have been boring just watching penguins. But he makes it awesome because he's the narrator. Morgan Freeman, as in anything he does, is awesome. He played God twice. Like, just the guy can make any concept or movie story interesting just because of his voice. And Shawshank Redemption, even without Morgan Freeman, like, you can put anyone else in the role, the movie works. But just so much about the movie is awesome. Like, what can I say that hasn't already been said? It's a great movie. Next up, 2019's Shazam. Now, I admittedly didn't know too much about Shazam before seeing the movie, but when I saw it, I fell in love with Shazam as a character. I think the overall idea is awesome. I love the movie, and this is one of the more recent ones, so I'm pretty sure a lot of people have already seen this one. It's a great standalone DC film. Now, DC films recently, admittedly, have not been so great, and there were a couple I did want to have on this list that I ultimately took off. But I do love Shazam. I think it deserves to be saved. It is a great superhero movie. Next up, number 15 in this category, halfway done, Slumdog Millionaire. It's a great movie. I do love it. I mean, there's really not much I can say with this movie that hasn't already been said. Just overall, Dave Patel does great in this movie. The overall story is really good. It's a great, once again, story with a great romance. And I do kind of feel bad, basically, for what happens between the main two characters and, the main character and his brother, I should say. And I do like the overall idea, basically, of how this character's encountered so many traumatic situations in his life that's how he's able to remember all these answers to the game show. It's a bit of a plot convenience, sure, but it works. Like I said, I love the movie. Number 16, 1987's Spaceballs. There aren't a lot of great parody movies that I wanted to put on this list, but I knew going in I would save Spaceballs. I love Spaceballs. It makes fun of Star Wars and Star Trek, as well as other film series perfectly. What can I say that hasn't already been said? I know I've been saying this a lot recently, but Spaceballs is a great movie. I love it. Next up, 2002 and 2004 Spider-Man 1 and 2. Tobey Maguire is really great as Spider-Man in both these movies. I don't hate 3, but I don't think it's good enough to be saved, though. But both movies are great. Is some of the CGI a bit dated? Yeah, but just both Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 are awesome. I would say both of them. I, however, would not save any of the Garfield films. I do not like the Andrew Garfield films at all. But I would also save Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And because the most recent Spider-Man just aired, I ultimately decided not to put it on the list. Maybe in 5-10 years down the line, if I make this list again, maybe I might include it then. But I ultimately left it off for now, just because maybe my opinions about it might change later on. But yeah, so I would say this, like I said, Spider-Man Homecoming, Tom Holland's also great as Spider-Man. And the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I had heard of Miles Morales before seeing that one, but I never really knew too much about him. But that one was also a great Spider-Man movie, so I would say those 4 Spider-Man movies. Next up, 2001, Spirited Away. Once again, it's probably in my top 10 favorite films. I'm a big fan of anime, and Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away is probably his best film, at least for me. There are a lot of other Hayao Miyazaki films I like, but this is the only one I would actually save. Like, I do love it. Like, there's really not that much I can say that hasn't been said. Like, just so much about this movie works. It's just such an original concept and story, and just everything in it I really do love. Alright, next up from Star Wars. I ultimately, in the end, had to make a couple of cuts, but I decided I would save Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, the only one from the Anakin trilogy, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, the only one from the Luke trilogy, and Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, from the Rey trilogy. I feel it's best just to save one from each of the films. Now, I don't hate any of the Star Wars films. I want to make that clear right now. I don't hate any of them, but some are better than others. But ultimately, I decided I would just save just these 3. And, of course, Rogue One as a standalone Star Wars film. I love Star Wars, like I said, as a whole. Are there films that are better than others? Yeah, obviously. But I don't hate any of the Star Wars films. I don't hate 1. I don't hate 8. But admittedly, they are the weakest. But I do like every Star Wars film. And Solo, I think, was good. I just think maybe just doing so many Star Wars films so close together hurts Solo. And I do think, yeah, giving Han Solo a backstory was a mixed idea, but I liked it. But ultimately, like I said, these are the 4 Star Wars films I would save. Next up, This Is the End. Once again, it's kind of a Christian-like movie, but it's not necessarily a Bible movie. But I do like it. It's once again an apocalypse movie, but it's the Christian apocalypse. Now, a lot of times, Christian apocalypse movies, even to me as a Christian, I have to admit, aren't that good. Like the whole Left Behind movie franchise and similar films, to me, aren't really that good. But this is probably the best story of this idea of basically the rapture and we follow people who are left behind. I actually think, as weird as it is, this is the best one. And having all these famous actors in it, basically Hollywood actors who basically get left behind and they basically have to deal with the Christian apocalypse. Like, it's just really fun. It's really funny. Like, just so much about this movie is awesome. And I do like the idea that basically if all these a-hole celebrities in Hollywood get left behind, like, how do they cope with that? And they all cope with it with their own ways. Like, there's just so many jokes that work. The demons and Satan in this movie are all really awesome. The CGI on them is pretty good, actually, to be honest. And I do like the ending. The original ending I read was not in the original movie. Let me rephrase this. The ending in This Is the End was originally not in the movie, but they came back and added that last minute, and I think it worked. And yeah, everyone does a great job. Seth Rogen, Jay Baruchel, Craig Robinson. Like, everyone is great in this movie. And it is kind of sad to see so many characters get killed off so early in the movie. Because I was like, I really hoped a lot of those characters would stay around longer than they did. But overall, I do love the movie. Like I said, in terms of Christian Apocalypse Rapture movies go, this is probably the best one. Next up, 1997's Titanic. As I said earlier, Night to Remember, essentially, if you watch that, then watch Titanic. It's clear James Cameron basically told a modern version of that, just adding the romance and the subplot about the diamond. But even then, I still think Titanic is great. I do think, once again, it wouldn't probably be top 10, or if it was, it'd be bottom of the top 10, but it still would be pretty high. If it wasn't, it would be like just shy. But I do love it. Is it a bit overrated? Sure, but Leo and Kate do great as these characters, and Billy Zane does great as the villain. Sure, he's a bit cartoony at times, but hey, I love this movie. It deserves to be saved. I love Titanic. It's a great movie. Next up, I would save Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2, and Toy Story 3. But I wouldn't save Toy Story 4. As I said when I did my whole Toy Story 4 review, you can find that video somewhere on my channel. I think it's good, but I think it's the weakest of the 4 films. Not to say that any of the films are bad. I honestly love all 4 Toy Story films, but I just think 1, 2, and 3 were better, and I love everything about 1, 2, and 3. There's really nothing I can say that hasn't been said about all 3 of these films. I just would save all 3 of them. And it was hard to make cuts for other movies because I would save all 3 of these films. But yeah, I wanted to save all 3 Toy Story films. I was born the same year Toy Story 1 came out. And now I'm an adult about the age my parents were when they had me when Toy Story 4 comes out. So it's like, this is like just so much of, like, just kind of perfect timing with this story. And finally, number 30 from this category, one that might surprise some people, 2010's Tron Legacy. I do like the original Tron, but I think it's just okay. But I love Tron Legacy. I'm a huge also fan of Daft Punk, so the fact that Daft Punk did a good chunk of the music in this movie is awesome. So, yeah, and I do like the whole idea of the movie. I think the story is actually a little bit better here than the original Tron, to be honest. Not to say the original Tron's bad. Like I said, I do like it. I just think Tron Legacy is better. Like, just so much about the movie I really love. So, this one just barely made the list, but I do love it. And so that's all 30 films from this category. And my grandmother's phone's ringing, so let's bring this one to an end, and then with the final category. All right, final category. And what's funny is the first 4 categories, between the first list and the second list, had some changes. But this final category, category 5, films that start with U, V, W, X, Y, and Z, they didn't change. I had 10 going into the first list, and I had 10 coming out of the second list. I still had that rule. I wanted 10 minimum from each category, but I didn't realize, this category didn't change at all. So this one's going to be the shortest, and let's just get through them. First would be 2000's Unbreakable. Now, as I said earlier when I was talking about Glass, I do honestly like all 3 of these films, but I decided not to save Split. I do like Split. I just don't think it's great, but I do love Unbreakable. It is a great film. Once again, Bruce Willis is really great in this film. M. Night Shyamalan films as a whole, like I said, are a mixed bag, but I do love Unbreakable and Glass, so I would definitely say both of those. And the fact we had to wait almost 2 decades for basically this trilogy to come to an end, I think it was well worth the wait, because it's just amazing both stories and the overall idea. Well, even Glass as well, or not Split as well. Like, all 3 movies are good, but like I said, I just really love Unbreakable, and I just would save Unbreakable, and sadly, Split didn't make it, but I would save Glass as well, so, yeah. Next, 2009's Up. once again, a Pixar film. I just loved Up. Like, just so much about the movie works. Like, the only thing I could say about Up that I think other people have already said, but I would say anyway, is like, it's just the opening is like so well done. It's like that itself could have been a movie, but the movie as a whole is just amazing. Like, I don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said. I love Up, and of course I would save it. Next up, also a Pixar movie from 2008. I would save WALL-E. WALL-E is a great Pixar movie as well. So, and again, what can I say hasn't been said? I like so much with WALL-E and Eve. The fact that WALL-E and Eve, again, it's a romance that works for me that's not really based on so much dialogue. And even the subplot about the human story, basically, with the captain, I think it also works pretty well. Like, so much about WALL-E is amazing, and it's just so cool. Like, just the ship in general, like, the whole idea, basically, like, the difference between surviving and living, and, like, how we should take care of the planet. Like, there's just so much about the movie in terms of messaging that's awesome. I mean, I just love it. Next, War for the Planet of the Apes, the third of the modern Planet of the Apes trilogy, I would save. I already said this, the other two, I'll keep it short. I love all three of these films. Andy Serkis is amazing. Not much else I can say. Next up, number 5, 2013's Warm Bodies. Might surprise people, but this is also probably my top 10 favorite films. I'm a huge fan of zombie movies, but I had to make some cuts with a lot of the zombie films in general that I had on my list of that 350 to just get to 100. But I do love Warm Bodies. I think one thing that makes it work so well is this idea, similar with Daybreakers. If so much of the world is now a zombie, now what? Well, what happens to zombies? They decompose into actually something even scarier than regular zombies. They become the bonies. And man, that is a pretty scary original concept. And even then, the story between R and Julie is pretty well done. And I do like the final act, basically how the war between the zombies, the bonies, and the humans all kind of comes together. It really works. Next up, another guilty pleasure movie, Weekend at Bernie's, the 1989 comedy. I saw this one with my parents one day when I was a kid. I was maybe 11 or 12, and it was on TV. I think they were into the DVD actually, and we watched it, and it was really great. I just found the movie overall funny. It's just a funny film. And seeing all the stuff that Bernie's corpse goes through throughout the movie, it's just funny. Now, I do like the sequel as well, and again, arguably that one is a zombie movie, but that one just didn't make the list. But the first movie I would save because I just love it. I always laugh when I see this movie. Of course I would save it. I just love this It's just a great movie. Next up is a TV movie, like I said, but this one is over an hour long. 2002's The Wild Thornberrys movie. Now, I'm a history nerd, like I said, but I'm also a bit of a geography nerd, and I loved the Wild Thornberrys as a kid just because they went all over the world exploring the idea of Eliza being able to talk to animals, encountering all these crazy adventures. There was just so much about the show I liked. And I didn't even mind as a kid, I was 7 or 8 when the show was on. I didn't even mind that it was starring a girl protagonist because just so much about the show was awesome. And there were a lot of shows as a kid. I'll admit I didn't watch if they starred a girl, but this one I did love just because I liked the general idea. A kid who could talk to animals. And then the Wild Thornberrys movie comes out, and man, it's a great story. It's probably one of the best Nickelodeon films, to be honest. I do like the song by Paul Simon. Me, my mom, my sister, we would actually watch the movie just because so we could hear the songs, and we'd always seeing that, or the scene where that song plays, where she's going to England. The story itself is amazing. I won't spoil the movie for those who haven't, but again, it's the story of a girl who can talk to animals, but what happens when she's basically uprooted from the only world she's known? It's just a great movie. Next up, Wonder Woman. Admittedly, Wonder Woman is a great movie. DC, like I said, in the more recent years hasn't been great, but I really did love this one. I was originally going to also save Captain Marvel on my first list, but I ultimately took that one out. But I did decide to save Wonder Woman. And, what can I say that hasn't been said? Wonder Woman, she's a great superhero, but she doesn't always get the best representation in television or the DC animated movies. But Gal Gadot did a really great job as Wonder Woman in this movie. So, yeah, I would definitely say this one. Number 9, would be World War Z. Now, I want to go and point this out right now. I've read World War Z, the book, and admittedly, this movie doesn't adapt faithfully from the book. Like, if this movie had been called something else, like, say, Zombie Planet or World of the Dead or something like that, admittedly, it probably wouldn't have been as memorable as a zombie film, or probably wouldn't have got as much attention because, you know, it has the name of the book, World War Z. But one thing I really like about this movie is that in a lot of zombie apocalypse stories, or even apocalypse stories generally, you don't follow what's going around the whole world. And I do like that in World War Z, it's not just confined to like one city or like one part of the United States. Instead, we go to a couple different cities, and then we go to several different countries. Brad Pitt does an awesome job in this movie, and there's a lot of other great characters as well. There are a few stupid things here in the movie as well, and admittedly, as there was this one video I saw that explained why the science behind the whole zombie virus is kind of BS. But overall, I do love the movie. Like I said, it's a standalone zombie movie. It's a great movie. And another movie I originally had on my first list I didn't have here was Day After Tomorrow, because again, I do like apocalypse movies. But I also like when we see the apocalypse from other parts of the planet, not just like one part of the United States or even just one country. So another movie I left off, 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. Because again, that's an apocalypse movie, but it's mostly confined to one location. But World War Z, we see how the zombie apocalypse affects the whole world, and overall the story is really great. So, like I said, if it had been called something else, it probably wouldn't have been as memorable or well known, but I think as a standalone zombie movie, it does its job well. And I love it. And finally, number 10 in this category, and number 100 of the 100 movies I would save, Zombieland. First and foremost, I am aware that there'll be a Zombieland sequel coming up. I'm looking forward to it. But the first Zombieland, sorry, it's a great movie. It's a really fun zombie story. Jesse Eisenberg and everyone else does a really great job in this movie. Admittedly, the way they kill Bill Murray is kind of dumb. To be honest, like that's like the one part of the movie I don't like. But everything else about the zombie movie, about Zombieland as a zombie movie, is awesome, and just a standalone. Like if it had never been made a sequel, I think it still would be a classic. But in the fact that we are getting a sequel from it, like I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I just love Zombieland. Of course, as I said at the beginning, I pretty much love all 100 of these movies. These are the 100 movies I would save. So, yep, this is the 10 from this category. So now I'll bring this video to an end. Alright, and that is the end of this video. That is the 100 films I would save. Like I said back at the beginning, I originally started filming this a few weeks ago, but I ultimately changed my list about halfway through filming, and I feel pretty good about the 100 films I chose to save. And as I hinted at once or twice, maybe in 5-10 years, maybe if other films come out, or if I think of films I didn't have on my list this time that I decide to add next time that I maybe never saw before, maybe my list will change, but we'll see. But for now, like I said at the beginning of this idea, if I could only save 100 films, these are the 100 I'm comfortable with saving. And I tried to give my best to explain why I love them, although a lot of them were just saying, I love this film and this is why. But yeah, I mean, I just enjoy all these films, and I would be happy if I was stuck with just these 100 films. And I think a lot of these films kind of influence me as a person, or like kind of like my personality, like what I find interesting and what I enjoy. So yeah, these are the 100 films I'm happy with saving. So this was a pretty long video once again. If you stuck through the whole thing, thank you very much. I appreciate your viewership. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and if you want to leave a comment, I appreciate it. What are some of the videos or films that you would save that I wouldn't? Are there any I save that you disagree with? Are there any films that are some of your, maybe say just your top 5 or top 10 favorite, and then what are your thoughts on and why would you save those? And hopefully I'll get back to you. That's all I got to say, and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Take care.